Welcome, sleepy traveler. You've arrived at a quiet space made just for you. My name is Valarie, and I am here to guide you gently into rest, to help ease your mind, soften your body, and drift you toward a peaceful, uninterrupted sleep. Whether your day was long or your thoughts feel a little too loud tonight, let this be your permission to slow down, to breathe, and to simply be. There's nothing more to do now. Just allow my voice to be your guide as we begin this gentle journey toward deep, nourishing rest. If you're new here, subscribe for sleep content like this, and like this video if you find it enjoyable. Begin. You've arrived in a quiet moment made just for you. Let your breath fall into a soft and natural rhythm. Tonight, there's nothing to do but rest. Allow your thoughts to drift like clouds across a quiet sky. The world can wait. This moment is yours. Feel your shoulders melt away from your ears. Your hands are soft, still, and at peace. There is no rush, only ease, only quiet. Each breath invites you deeper into calm. You're wrapped in safety, in stillness, in warmth. Let your body grow heavier with each breath. Your jaw relaxes, your brow smooths, your eyes rest. Inhale calm, exhale release. The day has ended, and now it's your time to simply be. You're not alone. The night is keeping gentle watch. Let the hush of twilight guide you inward. The rhythm of your breath is your lullaby. There is nothing to fix, nothing to hold on to. You are free to drift, to soften, to let go. Sleep comes slowly, softly, just like this moment. Let the silence beneath each breath soothe your heart. You are safe, you are cared for, you are enough. Sink into comfort, sink into the now. You don't have to try, just be. Let the weight of the day dissolve beneath you. There is a quiet here that welcomes you home. The stars outside are glowing just for you. You are floating now in stillness, in peace. This breath and the next are leading you towards sleep. Let yourself become a feather drifting downward. Soften your hands, your feet, your face, even your thoughts. The world outside slows to a hush. And within you, a calm is blooming. You are part of this quiet. You are part of the night. You are exactly where you need to be. Notice how the breath moves through your chest, gently and slow, like waves meeting the shore, like dusk meeting the trees. Your body remembers what it means to rest, to be still, to be at ease. And now you allow it. Let each breath in soften your thoughts. Let each breath out carry away what you no longer need. No effort, just surrender. No pressure, only peace. The clock has stopped ticking. The lists are no longer calling. This moment is timeless. This night is yours. Drift deeper into the quiet. Let the softness cradle you. Let go of even trying to let go. Let stillness come to you like a warm breeze. Let it wrap around you like a well-loved blanket. Your body is safe. Your breath is your guide. You are floating on a gentle sea of sleep. And everything is okay. Even if today was hard. Even if your mind still wanders. Even if your heart feels tender. Tonight you are being held by the breath, by the quiet, by this gentle pause between days. The light has dimmed. The world is resting. And so can you. Let your breath sink lower, slower, smoother. Let it guide you toward dreams that wait with open hands. There is a silence here that understands you. There is a peace here that welcomes all of you. You are whole just as you are. Let the rhythm of night settle into your bones. Let sleep come like a soft tide, slowly rising. With each wave, you drift further. With each breath, you drift deeper. You are ready. You are safe. The story is about to begin. So close your eyes, soften your breath, and enjoy tonight's bedtime story. If I'd known that the rain would lead me to a stranger's life, I might have climbed into the attic sooner. The storm began as a gentle patter against the roof, but by the time I carried the chipped teapot up the narrow steps, it was a steady drumming. The old house seemed to sigh with each gust of wind, as though relieved someone had finally ventured up here after all these years. I paused on the top step, breathing in the attic's familiar scent of dust and cedar. The air felt cooler here, touched by the faintest draft from the tiny square window tucked beneath the eaves. The attic had always been a place of mystery and avoidance for me. My mother used to store everything she didn't have the heart to throw away up here. Seasonal decorations, yellowed newspaper clippings, the kind of knickknacks that make you wonder why anyone kept them in the first place. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to face it. It was as though her absence lived most tangibly in the clutter, waiting to break me open if I touched it. But today, the rain left me no excuse. It was the first week since I'd moved back into my childhood home, and my to-do list had been glaring at me from the fridge. Clean attic. The first step onto the creaky floorboards made the entire room shiver. Dust swirled up in lazy spirals, and the wind slipped in through a cracked window pane, carrying the faint smell of wet leaves. My slippers scuffed across the boards as I surveyed the chaos. Half-collapsed cardboard boxes, a leaning tower of old National Geographic magazines, and a wicker chair missing its seat. All right, I muttered to myself. Let's see what ghosts you've been keeping. I started with a box near the window, brushing off layers of grime with my sleeve. Inside were old Christmas cards, their glitter faded to dull gray, and bookmarks from libraries that didn't exist anymore. A stack of pressed flowers fell apart in my hands, petals scattering like confetti across the floor. That's when I saw it. A shoebox wrapped in fraying twine, tucked beneath a broken lamp as though it had been hiding there for decades. Something about it caught me immediately. It wasn't just the careful wrapping, but the way the box seemed purposeful. Not forgotten, but waiting. I set my teacup down on the window ledge and slid the shoebox into my lap. My fingers trembled slightly as I untied the twine. The lid stuck for a moment, the edges softened by time, and then it gave way with a sigh of dust. Inside were postcards, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They weren't neatly stacked, just a tumble of corners and fading colors, the images blurred with age. A diner sign on a desert road, the Eiffel Tower beneath a sky that had once been bright blue. A lighthouse against a stormy Maine horizon, a night market in Tokyo with rows of glowing lanterns. I picked one up at random, a roadside diner in New Mexico. The photograph was grainy, the colors muted, but I could still make out a neon sign promising "Best Coffee in the Southwest." On the back, a line of looping cursive sprawled across the faded card. Made it here before the storm rolled in. Coffee's awful, but the pie's worth the drive. Thinking of you, E. No recipient, no stamp. Just a fragment of someone else's journey, suspended in time. My heart quickened. I dug through the shoebox, pulling postcard after postcard into a small, unsteady pile beside me. They were all the same, brief notes from someone named E or Eloise, or sometimes simply signed with a looping flourish. Some were addressed with phrases like, "To you, if you're still wondering," or "In case you need this today." None of them bore an official address, as though the act of sending had never been the point. For a moment I just sat there in the soft gray light of the attic, listening to the rain tick against the window and the faint groan of the rafters. My tea had gone lukewarm, but I sipped it anyway, letting the earthy flavor steady me. There was something achingly tender about these little messages, something that pricked at a part of me I hadn't touched in a long time. I turned over another card. This one was a photograph of the Pont Neuf in Paris, the bridge glowing at twilight. On the back, the message read, "The river is gold tonight. I wish you could see it. Maybe you will. Eloise." I whispered the name aloud, letting it curl in the attic air. Eloise. The rain shifted to a harder rhythm against the roof, and a draft rattled the tiny window. My hair stirred as though the attic itself were breathing. I imagined Eloise, whoever she was, standing on that bridge decades ago, thinking of someone she might never meet again, and writing a message for no one, or for everyone. I couldn't stop. Postcards of oceans, mountains, city streets, each with a little slice of a life I didn't know. Some were light-hearted. Nearly missed my train, but the cafe here makes up for it. And some felt like quiet confessions. One from Maine read simply, "If I don't come back, remember the lighthouse." By the time I'd gone through half the box, the attic floor around me was a patchwork of places I'd never been and moments I'd never lived. My fingers were smudged with age and ink, and then I found the one that made me pause. It was a card of a quiet garden, benches tucked beneath blooming cherry trees. On the back, "For whoever finds this, I hope you tell the story I couldn't." My chest tightened. I didn't know what she meant or who she'd been speaking to, but the words landed as if they were meant for me. That night I carried the shoebox downstairs. I left the attic half organized, dust still clinging to my sweater, but I couldn't think about anything else. I set the postcards beside me on the window seat overlooking the rain-slicked street and poured another cup of tea. The house creaked in the wind like it was listening. I fetched a fresh journal from my unpacked box of office supplies, a soft, leather-bound one I'd bought months ago and never used. On the first page I wrote in careful script, "To Miss Eloise, wherever you are." Then I began to write. At first I copied the words from the first postcard, the one with the desert diner and the bad coffee. But as my pen moved, the story began to spin in my mind. A solitary woman driving across the country in a weathered blue car, carrying secrets she wasn't ready to say aloud. She stops at that diner, orders the pie, and watches the rain streak the windows as she debates whether to keep driving or turn back to whatever she left behind. It wasn't just a postcard anymore. It was a life, a pulse, a voice whispering through the years. The clock in the hallway chimed softly. Midnight. My tea was cold again, and the rain had slowed to a mist. I closed the journal after a few pages, running my fingers over the words. My hand ached in a way it hadn't since college, when I used to write just for the joy of it. I glanced at the shoebox on the floor, full of untold stories. A thrill ran through me, quiet but insistent, like the first drop of rain before a storm. I didn't know yet why Eloise had written all these postcards, or why she'd never sent them. I didn't know if she wanted someone to find them, or if I was trespassing in a life that had nothing to do with mine. But I knew this. I was going to tell her stories. Some nights, the rain followed me into my dreams. It became a soft percussion beneath my thoughts, a backdrop to the scratch of my pen against paper. Even after the storm passed and the attic settled into its usual stillness, I found myself pulled to the shoebox like a tide. The postcards waited for me on the windowsill in my bedroom, a tumble of corners and whispers. I had fallen asleep last night with one beneath my hand, as though afraid the stories might slip away if I didn't keep touching them. When I woke that morning, the sky had cleared to a thin, washed-out blue. Sunlight leaked gently through the blinds, catching on the faint smudge of dust across my dresser. The world felt quieter than usual, as if the house was holding its breath with me. I made tea the same way I always did, Earl Grey with a drizzle of honey. Then, cup in hand, I went straight to the postcards. I could have scrolled through the news, checked emails, returned texts I hadn't answered in weeks. But none of that mattered anymore, not in the way this did. I slid the lid off the shoebox and began shuffling through the cards. Some I'd already read twice, maybe 3 times. The diner in New Mexico, the gold-lit river in Paris, the cryptic note about the lighthouse. Each one carried a story that had begun unfurling in my journal, threads weaving themselves into lives that weren't mine and yet felt intimately familiar. Halfway through the pile, I noticed a card I hadn't seen before. It was buried near the bottom, and when I pulled it free, the photograph was a little bent at the corner, as though it had been handled many times. A lake. The surface of the water rippled softly, dotted with sunlight, and a dense frame of pines surrounded the shore. Near the edge, on a rickety wooden dock, stood a blurry girl in a green swimsuit. Her hair was dark, clinging to her shoulders, and she seemed mid-turn, glancing back at whoever had taken the photo. I froze for a moment, inexplicably moved by the image. I didn't know this girl. She was probably my age in that captured moment, or maybe younger. And yet there was something in the way she half turned toward the camera, the suggestion of a smile, like she was about to say something secret to whoever held it. I flipped the card over, saw the loon again, thought of you, and just that. No date, no year, no other clue. A loon. I'd never seen one in real life, but the idea of it sparked something in me. The haunting call over a misty lake. The kind of sound that could stick to memory like pine sap. I imagined that N had been sitting in a canoe or on a cabin porch, the call echoing across the water, and it made them think of the girl in the green swimsuit. I leaned back in the window seat, cradling my tea against my chest, and let my mind wander. A summer camp came to mind first, one of those rustic lakeside ones with squeaky bunk beds and the smell of wood smoke and everything. Maybe N and the girl had met there as kids, running barefoot across the docks, sneaking down to the water after lights out. Or maybe they were older, counselors sharing stolen afternoons by the lake. I pictured the moment this postcard was written. N sitting at a weathered picnic table, pen in hand, damp from swimming or rain. The loon calls. Across the lake, the girl dives into the water, her green swimsuit flashing before she disappears beneath the surface. I could feel it. The sun-warmed wood under my arms, the taste of metal from the lake on my tongue, the way a summer that important never quite leaves your body. And for a while, the attic and my empty house and the weight I'd been carrying since Mom died all faded. It was just me and this imagined life, a memory that wasn't mine but somehow soothed something raw inside me. By the time I opened my journal, the first sentence practically wrote itself. The girl in the green swimsuit didn't know she would live forever in someone else's memory. The pen flew after that. The story became about two girls, camp friends who built a world of their own over one enchanted summer. They whispered secrets on the dock, shared marshmallows by the fire, and left each other notes in the knotholes of the wooden cabins. I decided that the girl in green had been the brave one, the one who dared to swim out to the platform in the middle of the lake and dive first, and was the watcher, the rememberer, the one who held on to things after everyone else had gone home. When I finished, I sat back and exhaled, my tea cold again. Writing these stories was like opening a window in a room I hadn't realized was suffocating. For the first time since moving back here, I felt lighter, less like a ghost in my own life. I decided then and there, this would be my new ritual. One postcard, one story, every week. The following Saturday, I took my notebook to the library cafe, a cozy little corner where I used to do homework as a teenager. The barista, Mark, still worked there, a man with a perpetually untamed beard and a collection of quirky mugs he rotated behind the counter. "You're back in town," he said, raising an eyebrow as he handed me a latte. "Yeah," I said, "just for a while. I'm sorting some things out." He nodded like he understood, though I wasn't sure anyone really could. I chose a seat by the window and pulled out my journal, the leather soft beneath my fingers. Around me, the soft hiss of the espresso machine and the gentle murmur of pages turning became a kind of companionable backdrop. By the second week, Mark noticed my routine. "You're always scribbling in that thing," he said one morning, sliding a cappuccino across the counter. "Working on a novel?" "Not exactly." I hesitated, then smiled. "They're postcard tales." He tilted his head. "Postcard tales?" I explained, sort of. I told him I'd found some old postcards and was writing stories for each of them. I didn't mention Eloise or the shoebox or the way the words sometimes felt like they belonged to me, even though they didn't. He grinned. "That's actually pretty cool. Next time you'll have to read me one." I laughed it off, but part of me thrilled at the idea that these little private rituals might become something bigger, maybe even something shared. It was during my third week of this ritual that I began to notice a pattern. The name, or more accurately, the initial N. It appeared on more postcards than I'd first realized. Sometimes it was a full name scrawled hastily, Nathaniel maybe, or Nora. Other times it was just the single letter, curling like a hook at the end of a sentence. I flipped through the shoebox one night, cross-legged on my bedroom floor, looking only for that letter. There it was again, on a postcard from a wind-swept cliff. Almost lost my hat in the wind. Thought of your laugh. N and another. Over an image of a rain-slick city street. Some streets look like mirrors after the rain. Wonder if you'd walk them with me. Nye. I found myself reading these differently, not as stories, but as whispers meant for someone specific, someone whose absence hummed in the spaces between the lines. And I couldn't explain why, but I felt drawn to N in a way that was different from Eloise. Eloise's postcards felt like an invitation to create. N's felt like a pulse, a quiet tether to something I almost recognized. The night I realized this, I couldn't sleep. I wandered the house barefoot, the hardwood floor cool under my toes, and eventually climbed back into the attic. The wind rustled against the window, and the faint scent of old cedar greeted me like an old friend. I set the shoebox in my lap, tracing my finger over the edges of the postcards. I didn't know these people. I didn't know if N and Eloise were lovers, friends, or strangers whose lives intersected only through ink and paper. But I knew this. Their words were changing me. I wasn't as alone as I had been the day I climbed those attic stairs for the first time. Someone, decades ago, had felt what I was feeling now, a need to hold on to moments that might otherwise dissolve into nothing. And I was ready to follow that thread wherever it led. I didn't expect the world to change on such a quiet morning. The sky was a soft gray, the kind that made the streets look like they were still dreaming. The rain from the night before had left a sheen on the sidewalk, and the maple tree in my front yard dripped slow, patient drops into the patchy grass. I padded down the walkway in my slippers, hugging my sweater close against the crisp morning air. Checking the mail had become a ritual of absence, bills, the occasional flyer, the ghost of a life moving quietly forward. It was never exciting. It was never anything. Until that morning. When I opened the creaky mailbox, there it was, lying on top of the usual stack like it had been waiting for me all these years. A postcard. My heart gave a startled little kick against my ribs. It wasn't just any postcard. The edges were frayed with age, the colors soft with time. On the front was a photograph I knew too well. A tiny bookstore tucked between two brick buildings, its windows glowing amber against a wet street. The corner of my mouth trembled. I didn't even have to turn it over to feel it. The weight of memory, sudden and alive, like a breeze through an open window after years of stale air. I had been there. I had stood under the awning of that very bookstore on a rainy afternoon in my 20s, clutching a paper bag with a second-hand copy of The Little Prince. And beside me had been someone whose laugh cracked open my world like sunlight. Nathan. I closed my eyes, and the memory swallowed me whole. We had met by accident, or maybe by the strange choreography of the universe. I was 24, a few years out of college, restless in a city that seemed determined to hurry past me. He was a traveler, or at least that's what he said. A man with wind in his smile and stories that made you believe he'd never lived the same day twice. We ducked into that bookstore to escape a sudden downpour. The bell over the door jingled, and I remember shaking rain from my hair as Nathan held it open for me, grinning like the storm was an old joke only he understood. "You ever notice," he said, "that rain makes strangers into co-conspirators?" I'd laughed, even though I didn't quite get it. We spent hours there, wandering through the dusty aisles, pulling books down just to read each other the first lines. He had a way of making everything feel like a secret shared between just the two of us. When the rain stopped, he walked me out under the dripping awning and said, "I'm going to send you something someday. Don't forget to check your mailbox." And then he was gone. I told myself later that I must have imagined the whole thing. His warmth, his words, the idea that someone like him could drift into my life like a song and then leave a note hanging in the air. Months turned into years, and the mailbox stayed silent. Life moved on, as it always does, until today. My hands shook as I flipped the postcard over, in the familiar looping handwriting, "To Maya, from an old friend." I stared at the words, my breath caught somewhere between a laugh and a sob. There was no return address, no date, just my name and that gentle nudge from the past. I carried it inside like it might dissolve if I walked too fast. I set it on the kitchen table, untouched for a long moment, just looking. The paper felt softer than it should, worn like a pebble in someone's pocket for years. "An old friend," I whispered. The words stirred something deep in me. Not just the memory of Nathan, but the realization that my little ritual, my postcard tales, had somehow invited the past to speak back. For weeks I'd been sifting through other people's lives, stitching their fragments into stories, and now, impossibly, one of my own had found me. I brewed tea with hands that wouldn't quite stop trembling. The kettle whistled softly, a familiar comfort against the strangeness buzzing in my chest. Once I sat down, I picked up the postcard again and noticed something I'd missed at first. A faint smudge near the bottom, like a fingerprint pressed into the ink before it dried. It made him real, more real than he'd been in years. My mind spun with questions. How had he found me? How did he know I was here, back in my childhood home, Had he kept his promise all these years, carrying this little piece of memory until the moment felt right? I glanced at the shoebox of postcards on the windowsill, their edges glowing in the morning light. A shiver passed through me. Was it coincidence? Or had Nathan somehow sensed that I'd been living in postcards lately, talking to ghosts of my own making? The library cafe felt different that day. Mark slid a cappuccino across the counter, eyeing me like he could tell I wasn't quite on the ground. "You look electric," he said. I laughed softly, shaking my head. "You won't believe this." When I told him about the postcard, he leaned against the counter with a low whistle. "You're kidding. That's like something out of your stories." "Exactly," I said, my fingers tracing the warm ceramic of my cup. "Except this one's mine." He grinned. "So what are you gonna do about it?" I didn't have an answer. I wanted to write back, but there was nowhere to send it. I wanted to find him, but I didn't even know if he wanted to be found. Instead, I pulled out my journal. The words came in a rush, as if Nathan had uncorked a part of me I didn't realize was waiting. I wrote about that day at the bookstore, about the smell of old paper and rain-soaked streets, about the way laughter had felt like a hand pulling me into the light. Then, without meaning to, I wrote to him, "I thought I imagined you. I thought maybe I dreamed you into the rain and let the city swallow you whole. But you're real, and I'm here, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with the years that came between." By the time I closed the journal, the cafe had grown quiet. Afternoon light pooled across the wooden tables, and I felt like I was sitting in a pocket of time that didn't belong to anyone but me. That night, I couldn't resist. I climbed into the attic with a flashlight and the shoebox of postcards. I needed to see them again, to hold the lives I'd borrowed and the one that had just returned to me. I spread them across the floor in neat rows, letting the images form a patchwork of distant places, deserts, oceans, cities, quiet roads. And there, among them, I noticed it, the pattern I hadn't fully understood until now. So many of them had that same looping initial, N, the diner in New Mexico, the windswept cliff, the girl in the green swimsuit by the lake. I froze, my heart skipping. Could it be? Was it possible that Nathan had been leaving breadcrumbs for years? That the shoebox I'd found wasn't a stranger's life at all, but a trail that had always been winding its way back to me? The thought left me dizzy. It was too much to believe. And yet, holding his postcard in my hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that the mailbox wasn't done speaking. I lay in bed that night with the postcard on my nightstand, the glow of the streetlight brushing the edges of its worn paper. My fingers itched for a pen, for another story, for a way to stitch this impossible thread into something whole. I didn't know if Nathan was somewhere in the world thinking of me, or if this was his final echo. I didn't know if the next day's mailbox would hold another fragment of a conversation I thought ended years ago. But I knew this. I wasn't just the keeper of other people's postcards anymore. Now the story was mine. Some journeys begin with a whisper, not a plan. The morning I decided to go to the bookstore, the postcard burned like a soft coal in my pocket. I'd slept with it on my nightstand, staring at it long enough to memorize every faded line, the blurred reflection of the wet street, the soft glow of the windows. By sunrise, I knew I couldn't just keep imagining. I had to see it. The coastal town where the bookstore lived wasn't far, maybe 3 hours by car if I followed the back roads. I packed a thermos of tea and a granola bar I probably wouldn't eat, and I slid the postcard into my sweater pocket. It felt heavier than paper should, as if it carried the weight of all the years between Nathan's promise and now. The drive was a quiet one. Fields rolled past my window, still slick with dew. Barns and faded billboards came and went, and every so often I caught glimpses of the ocean, gray and breathing. I didn't turn on the radio. I wanted to hear the hum of my own thoughts, the soft insistence of the tires against the road. I thought about Nathan the whole way, the way his laughter used to hit like a surprise splash of water. How, back in my 20s, I thought he was someone who could only belong to a summer afternoon, too wild and temporary to hold on to. I thought about the way I'd tucked that memory away, convinced it was a half-dream. And now, the idea that he'd been here, at that bookstore recently enough to leave a message for me, it felt surreal, like the line between the past and present had thinned overnight. By the time I reached the town, the sky had cleared into a pale, washed-out blue, and the gulls were wheeling lazy circles above the harbor. The streets smelled faintly of brine and something warm, coffee or bread, I couldn't tell. And then I saw it. The bookstore. It looked almost exactly as it had in the postcard and in my memory. A narrow little shop wedged between two taller brick buildings, its windows glowing with the soft amber of old lamps. The door was painted a weathered teal now, but the bell above it was the same one I remembered hearing in my 20s. When Nathan had followed me inside, shaking rain from his hair. My chest tightened. I parked and stood on the opposite sidewalk for a moment, just staring. My reflection hovered in the glass window like a ghost, layered over rows of books and a paper mobile of gulls swaying gently in the draft. Time folded in on itself. I half expected to see my younger self step out of the shop, laughing. Finally, I crossed the street and pushed the door open. The bell jingled, and the smell of old paper and wood polish rushed at me, familiar and comforting. Inside, it was quiet. Sunlight slanted through the front windows, touching the tops of stacked books. Wooden shelves leaned like old friends against one another, stuffed with paperbacks and hardcovers that smelled of dust and sea air. A fat orange cat slept in the patch of light near the counter, tail flicking every so often. I wandered slowly, letting my fingers trail along the spines. It felt like stepping into a memory, like the years between then and now had been an intermission, and the world had patiently held my place. But I wasn't here for nostalgia. I was here for what exactly? A clue? A message? Proof that the postcard wasn't a one-time miracle? When I reached the counter, the woman behind it looked up from a book. She was maybe in her 60s, with kind eyes and a streak of silver in her hair. "Morning," she said warmly. "First time here?" I hesitated, then shook my head. "No, I was here a long time ago." Something in my voice must have carried more than I intended, because she tilted her head slightly, curious. I reached into my pocket and placed the postcard on the counter, my hand hovering there for a second before I pulled it back. "I got this in the mail," I said, my voice quieter now. "And I think it led me here." She leaned closer, her eyes softening as she studied it. Then she smiled. "Oh," she said simply, like a puzzle piece had clicked into place. "You're Maya." My breath caught. "You know me?" "Not exactly," she said. "But I know who left that for you. Months ago, a man came in. Tall, dark hair, a little older than the picture in his stories, but his eyes were the same. He asked if he could leave a postcard for someone. Said, 'She'll come. Eventually. It'll find its way.'" I gripped the edge of the counter, my legs suddenly shaky. That sounds like him." She nodded knowingly. He didn't give a number or an address, just smiled like he knew the tide would carry you back one day. I swallowed hard, the postcard suddenly feeling heavier in my pocket again. "Did he say anything else?" She thought for a moment. "He said he'd stop in again, if the road allowed it. He seemed like the kind of man who listens to the wind more than a calendar." A shaky laugh escaped me. Yes, that's Nathan." Hearing his name aloud in this place was like striking a bell in an empty hall. It echoed somewhere deep in me. I lingered in the shop, running my hands over the books, hoping for something more, some tangible bridge to him. But there were no hidden notes, no other postcards tucked into the shelves. Just the soft sigh of pages and the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. I bought a slim notebook, more out of instinct than need, and the woman wrapped it in brown paper with a piece of twine. "Something tells me you'll fill this one quickly," she said with a small, knowing smile. Outside, the street had warmed in the sun. I stood for a moment beneath the awning. watching the reflection of the gulls in a puddle near the curb. The town was alive in that quiet coastal way. A fisherman hosing down his boat, a couple walking hand in hand with ice cream, the distant sound of a dog barking. As I walked along the harbor, I let the postcard brush against my fingertips inside my pocket. This wasn't just memory anymore. It wasn't just a story I was writing for someone else. For the first time in years, the past didn't feel like a closed door. It felt like a window cracked open, letting in a breeze that carried the scent of possibility. I didn't know if Nathan would come back. I didn't know if he wanted me to find him, or if he just wanted me to know he was still out there, somewhere, laughing in the rain. But I knew this. I wasn't the same woman who had climbed into the attic looking for closure. I was someone who could follow the thread of a postcard to the edge of the sea. Someone who could walk through a doorway into the life I'd almost forgotten. As I turned back toward my car, a single thought rose and settled in my chest like a quiet promise. The story wasn't over. The house felt different after the bookstore trip. I couldn't quite explain it, but something in the air had shifted. The creaks of the old floors seemed softer, the light through the windows warmer, like the house itself had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. I came home with salt on my skin and the scent of ocean clinging to my sweater, carrying the brown paper-wrapped notebook and a quiet pulse of hope in my chest. The first thing I did was climb the stairs to my room, Nathan's postcard still in my pocket. I didn't tuck it into the shoebox with the others. It didn't belong there. Those postcards were fragments of other lives, stories I'd borrowed and spun into my journal. They were nostalgia and mystery, sepia-toned whispers from people who might never meet me. Nathan's postcard was different. It wasn't just a memory. It was a hand reaching forward instead of backward, a bridge between then and now. I set it on the windowsill, the soft morning light catching its edges, and beside it I placed a neat stack of blank postcards I'd bought from the library gift shop on a whim. They were simple, white, and waiting, the kind of emptiness that hums with possibility. That night I sat at the window seat with a cup of tea and picked up my pen. For weeks I had been writing for the past, giving voices to postcards that had been silent for decades. But now I wanted to write forward. I wrote my first card slowly, the words forming like a shy smile. To whoever needs it today, the rain will pass. The light will find its way back. Don't give up on the day before it begins. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling a warmth in my chest I hadn't felt in years. Then I signed it simply, a friend. I addressed it to a random name and street from the community bulletin board at the grocery store, a local address tacked under babysitter available and lawn care needed. My hands trembled a little as I slid the card into the mailbox the next morning. There was something intoxicating about it, the idea that a stranger might open their mail one day and find a soft thread of hope waiting for them. Days turned into weeks, and the ritual bloomed quietly. Every few mornings I'd brew tea, settle at the window, and write a postcard. Sometimes they were small encouragements. Other times they were fragments of beauty I wanted to share. Saw the first robin today. Thought you should know spring is coming. The moon looked like a silver button tonight, holding the sky together. Someone out here believes in you. I found addresses in the phone book, community postings, and even old local directories. I never signed my real name. Each card was just a little gift to the unknown. The mailbox, once a symbol of absence and waiting, became a portal. Every time I lifted its creaky lid to send a card out into the world, I felt a flicker of connection, like my heart had grown a dozen invisible threads, stretching toward lives I might never touch in any other way. And slowly, the loneliness that had wrapped itself around me after my mother died, after the years of drifting through my own life, began to loosen. The attic, too, felt different. I visited less often now, not because I wanted to forget the shoebox, but because I no longer needed to hide in other people's stories to feel alive. I still loved the smell of old cedar and the soft shiver of wind through the tiny window. But now the postcards were companions rather than anchors. Nathan's card stayed on the windowsill, gathering sunlight and moonlight in equal measure. Sometimes I traced my finger over his handwriting, the looping letters that had once belonged to a fleeting moment in my 20s and now felt like a quiet, steady heartbeat. I didn't know where he was. I didn't know if he'd ever come back, but the uncertainty no longer ached the way it used to, because I had found my own way forward. Spring arrived in subtle gestures, crocuses pushing through stubborn soil, the distant sound of lawnmowers, the first mornings when I could open the window and let the world in without a shiver. I was sipping tea at the window seat one quiet morning when I noticed something different in the mailbox. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, the sun glinting off the metal. But when I walked down the path in my slippers, heart thumping in a way I hadn't felt in months, I saw it. A single postcard lying on top of the usual pile of envelopes. My hands trembled as I lifted it. The front was a photograph of a misty meadow, the grass silvered by morning light. I turned it over, my breath caught in my throat, still writing, still remembering. N.N. The world seemed to still for a heartbeat. I stood there on the walkway, the cool spring air wrapping around me, and laughed softly, half in disbelief, half in joy. He knew. Somehow across the miles and years, Nathan knew I had found a way to keep the thread alive. I carried the postcard inside like a sacred thing and placed it beside his first one on the windowsill. The two cards looked like bookends to a chapter I hadn't realized I was writing. Then I reached for one of my blank postcards. This time, the words came easily. Dear N, I'm still writing too. And now I'm sending these stories into the world. Little notes to strangers the way you once sent yours to me. You were right. A postcard can be a bridge. Thank you for reminding me that I'm still part of the world, still part of a story that isn't finished yet. I paused, letting my pen hover over the page. Then I added, if the wind allows, I hope it carries you back my way. I signed it with a small flourish, Maya. I didn't have an address for him. I didn't even know where to send it, but I wrote it anyway because maybe the act of writing was the real connection. The weeks that followed settled into a new rhythm. Every postcard I sent out felt like planting a seed in soil I might never see again. I imagined my notes landing in mailboxes across town, startling someone out of their routine, making them smile, or maybe just giving them a pause they didn't know they needed. Sometimes, walking down Main Street, I'd catch strangers glancing at me and wonder if they were recipients, carrying a little secret joy I had nudged into their day. My journal filled with reflections and new story ideas, not because I was hiding in other lives, but because I was living in mine again. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the house in gold, I sat by the window and looked at the line of postcards I'd kept. Nathan's 2 messages and a small handful of my own that I hadn't sent yet. I realized something simple, something so clear it made my throat tighten. The attic had been a room of ghosts. The postcards had been relics of memory and longing. And now my window had become a place of beginning. I wasn't just remembering anymore. I was reaching. The last light of that evening slanted across the windowsill, turning the postcards into small golden islands. I thought of Nathan, wherever he was, and of the strangers who might open their mailboxes tomorrow to find a piece of my heart in the form of a few quiet words. I smiled, picked up my pen, and began to write. Because some stories aren't meant to end. They're meant to keep traveling, like postcards in the wind, like laughter in the rain, like love that lingers across the years and finds its way home. And that ends tonight's meditation. You're welcome to stay for a bit longer if you like. Have a beautiful night. Until next time.